Hey, and welcome back. And in this video, we're going to tackle the often confusing topic of worship guitar tone. Now, as someone who spent countless hours experimenting with different gear and settings, I know firsthand how overwhelming it can be to navigate the whole world of tone. But fear not, because today I want to share with you some fundamental principles that will help to guide you in your tone journey, regardless of your skill level, your current equipment, or your playing environment. Now, before we dive in, let's just quickly address the elephant in the room. Tone is subjective. What sounds amazing to one person might not work for someone else, and it's all about that personal preference and finding what works best for you and your specific worship context. And then also remember that a huge part of your tone comes from your technique. If you fret and strike the strings with confidence and you have some solid playing skills, then you're already well on your way to achieving a great sound. It's also really important to acknowledge the fact that everyone's situation is unique. You see, we all have different guitars or different amps or different pedals and different pedal boards, or some use digital devices like a Kemper or a Helix. So the gear is so widespread and different between everybody. And then go ahead and add to the fact that everyone's skill levels will also be different and vary. And then we're all playing in different sized venues with various types of bands and ensembles. Some of us have a 2 electric guitar big worship team, where others might just be 3 musicians on stage. So if you look at all these variables at play, then it's really clear that there can't be a one-size-fits-all approach to crafting the perfect worship guitar tone, because like I said, number 1, tone is subjective, and then number 2, everyone's situation is different. And that's why in this video, we'll focus on the fundamental principles instead, so that you can go ahead and apply that to your own unique situation. These principles will serve as a guide as you make your gear choices, dial in your tone settings, and refine your specific tone to suit your unique needs and preferences. Now, with that massive worship guitar tone disclaimer out of the way, let's go ahead and talk tone by looking at the essential pedals and effects that every worship guitarist should consider having in their arsenal. For every pedal, we're going to talk about what it does, why you need it, and how it works. And remember that we're sticking to the fundamentals in this video, and different pedals will have different settings and different parameters. So let's go ahead and kick things off with the mighty compression pedal. Now, a compressor evens out the dynamics of your playing. In essence, it's going to make the quiet bits louder, and it's going to make your loud parts quieter. It helps you to create a more consistent polished tone, and it can add some sustain to your playing. Some common parameters are things like threshold, ratio, attack, release, and output. So threshold is going to set the level at which that compression is going to kick in. Lower settings will mean it's going to compress more of the signal, and higher settings means it's going to compress less of the signal. You need to tell that compression when to kick in. Does it need to happen quickly, or does it need to only happen at a certain stage? That is what you're going to be able to set with your threshold. Now, once that compression kicks in, then we talk about ratio, and that's going to determine how much compression is applied to that signal that exceeds the threshold. So as soon as you have a signal that's going to exceed the threshold that you set, so the compression knows, okay guys, it's time to kick in, squeeze the sound, compress it all together, it needs to know how heavily do we need to compress it. So if you have a higher ratio, it's going to give you a really tight compressed sound, whereas a lower ratio setting is going to give you a more gentle compression on your tone. Now, in addition to threshold and ratio, you also get attack. And attack is going to control how quickly that compressor is going to react to the incoming signal. So if you have a faster attack time, then it's going to help tame some of your louder transients and create a smoother sound. Whereas if it's a slower attack sound, it's going to take more time to actually for the compression to kick in. So it's when does the compression kick in? How much does it need to compress with the ratio? And then your attack is how fast should that compression start working. Now, next up, you also have release. This is going to set how quickly that compressor needs to return to normal after that signal then again falls below that threshold. So if you have a longer release time, then it's going to create a more natural, less squashed sound as opposed to slower release sounds. The thing with compression is it's a thing that you want to feel more than what you want to hear. So if you have something that is quickly kicks in and quickly releases, it's going to sound unnatural, right? It's just going to be too fast. It's not going to sound natural. So you want to make sure that you use all of these settings from the threshold, the ratio, the attack, and the release in a way that it gives you a musical sounding compression. Now, some pedals also have an output or a makeup gain, which will go in and boost the overall volume to compensate for that reduction in dynamic range used by compression. So it's very important to use compression subtly, and especially in a worship context, because too much compression is going to remove all of those dynamics on your guitar. It's going to make it sound lifeless and flat. So you want to aim for a balance that evens out the dynamics without sacrificing the natural feel of your playing. All right, now let's listen to a clip with and without compression. Without compression, and then with the compression. So you can actually hear it squeezing your sound. Of course, we went to the limit by pushing up the level of that compression all the way so that you can actually hear it. But this is just for demonstration purposes so that you can actually hear it on the video. Now look what happens when I play something super soft. When I pick it super soft without compression. I'm going to pick the same thing again with compression, same intensity of picking. So you can actually see it brings those softer bits up quite a bit. Without compression. So it's way more noticeable, and of course we are overemphasizing the levels there as well. Now the same happens in terms of bringing up your lower levels. I can also kind of tame down my higher levels. So if we were to take more of a striking the strings quite hard without compression, and then with compression, you can actually hear the second time the sound is tamed quite a bit, so it doesn't quite sound as drastic. So that's one of the reasons for compression. It just evens out your sound. So let's listen to this heavily striked strings again without compression, and then with compression. So there you go, that should give you a good sense of what the compression does. Now next up we have one of my favorites, which is gain. Now gain comes in two varieties. You get high gain and you get low gain pedals. Now a high gain drive pedal, it's going to add a significant amount of distortion and sustain to your sound. And it's really perfect for creating some thick and heavy tones that can cut through the mix during intense worship moments. Now the way that the pedal works, it's going to amplify and clip your guitar signal, resulting into a distorted, harmonically rich tone. That's a sound we all love of the guitar, and some common settings on gain pedals would be the following. Of course, you've got your gain control, and that's, as it says, it's going to control the amount of distortion or gain in your sound. Higher settings, it's going to lead to like more of a saturated, harmonically rich tone, whereas lower settings will give you less gain and less distortion. Tone is another common setting on drive pedals because it's going to go in and adjust the overall brightness or the darkness of that distortion. So if you have clockwise settings on your tone control, it's going to boost the treble frequencies, making it sound brighter, and then counterclockwise settings will emphasize the bass and lower frequencies, making it sound darker. So that's a great way to kind of shape the way that the gain sounds in terms of the brightness. If it's too bright, it's going to be hurting your ears, and if it's too dull, it's not going to be able to cut through the mix. So you kind of need to find that sweet spot right there. And then of course you get volume. That's just going to set the output level of the pedal, and it will allow you to match the volume of your distorted sound with your clean tone. It's really important to use high gain and high drive pedals strategically in worship settings, because too much distortion can start to muddy the mix or even overpower the vocals or other instruments. So you want to focus on achieving that thick, sustaining tone that complements the overall sound without dominating it or getting lost in the mix. Let me just give you my amp sound without any drive pedals. And this is with the high gain pedal switched on. So as you can see, it brings a lot of drive and distortion. And we also get a low gain drive pedal. Now a low gain drive, that's going to add more of a subtle amount of grit and warmth to your clean tone. It's really great for adding depth and character to your playing without being so obvious as a high gain pedal. Now this pedal works by slightly boosting and compressing your signal, creating a mildly overdriven sound. The settings are typically the same as a high gain pedal we've just looked at, but of course the pedal is going to respond with less drive and less gain. Now what's interesting is that worship guitarists tend to use a second stage of a low gain drive to add some complexity and richness to their tone. Alright, so now what we're going to listen to is listening to a low gain drive going into my higher gain. So obviously that low gain is being fed into the high gain, and then it affects how your high drive pedal is going to work, and it's going to typically give you a more responsive and dynamic sound. What we're going to do now is let's flip the order. Instead of having the low gain into the high gain, we are going to go ahead and change it to make it so that you have your high gain going into your lower gain pedal. Let's listen to what that sounds like with both of those pedals engaged as well. So even just as I'm playing it, it's definitely a different sound depending on whether you like it or not. But for me, I lose a little bit of that responsive dynamic sound that I have when I have the low gain going into the high gain. So it's totally up to you in terms of not just what you like the sound to sound like, but also what feel you like to have when you are playing. And obviously when you have a high gain pedal going into a low gain, it's very different than the alternative. And the only way you can find what works for you is to experiment and move the pedals around and see which sound you prefer. Remember, the tone needs to not just sound good in your room, it needs to sound good on stage and good through the main PA speakers. Now next up we have a boost pedal. Now a boost pedal increases the volume of your signal without significantly altering the tone. It can help you to cut through the mix during solos or stand out for any important guitar parts when you need a little bit of a volume lift. What that pedal does, it just amplifies your guitar signal, and in some cases it will also push your amp or other pedals a little bit harder depending on its placement. Now the boost or the level, that's going to control the amount of volume or the boost that is being applied to your signal. If you have a higher setting on that boost or that volume, it's going to be a more pronounced volume increase, and if it's lower, it's going to be more subtle. A lot of boost pedals also come with a tone knob where you can go ahead and shape the frequency response of that boosted signal. A boost pedal is really a versatile tool for emphasizing some specific guitar parts or to stand out with solos or whatever is needed when your guitar needs to cut through a dense mix. Now the main thing to be mindful of is just that overall volume balance. We want to avoid overpowering any other instruments or even causing unwanted distortion or noise when everything is set to 11. Alright, so now let's have a listen to a boosted and a non-boosted signal. First, we're going to start with a non-boosted signal. This also has drive and delay and reverb and all those kind of things, but without engaging the boost, it sounds like this. Now with the boost, it's going to sound like this. And it's actually doing two things there. It actually just makes it a little bit louder. You can also set your boost setting to bring up your volume quite drastically. But in this case, when we engage it, it also drives some of the other pedals in our chain a little bit louder and harder, resulting in more drive and saturation and breakup. And we'll cover that in a little bit more detail when we look at the gain staging. So that's your boost that you can use to boost the level or also use to drive your other pedals and amp a little bit harder. Now, another common thing on a pedal board is your volume pedal. A volume pedal is going to allow you, as it says, to control the overall volume of your guitar signal with your foot. So you can kind of hands-free be able to get volume boosts. It's very useful for creating smooth volume swells where you want to play a chord and then swell the volume in. You might want to control some dynamics, and it can even serve as a mute switch. Just step on it, heel down, if you want to go ahead and tune silently without anybody hearing you tuning your guitar. So what a volume pedal does is it attenuates your signal as you rock it back and forth with your foot, and it's really useful to get a hands-free approach when it comes to adjusting your volume. And then another favorite is the delay pedal, of course. Now a delay pedal is going to create echoes of your playing. It's going to add some depth and dimension to your sound. It can make your playing sound larger and more spacious, and it can be used for creative effects as well. What happens is the pedal actually records your signal and then it plays it back after a set amount of time, creating that repeating echo effect. Now the settings that you have to play with is your time or delay, which is going to set the time interval between the original signal that you played and then the repeated echoes. So shorter times will create more of a slapback effect, while longer times will produce more spacious atmospheric repeats. You also have the feedback control, and that's going to determine how many times that delayed signal is being fed back into the pedal. Ultimately, it's going to affect the number of repeats that you hear. So if you set it super low, you might just hear one delay repeat, whereas higher settings could result in more echoes that kind of fade out gradually and over time. Now, when we're working with a delay pedal, most pedals have this mix or level control, which will allow you to balance between the dry, unaffected guitar signal and then the delayed signal. Higher settings will emphasize that delay effect, where you hear more of the delay and less of the natural signal, while lower settings will provide you with more of a subtle ambiance. Some delay pedals offer additional controls like tap tempo for synchronizing the delay time with a song's tempo. So as you're playing, you can just tap it and then automatically it will go ahead and synchronize with the song. And you can also have modulation for adding movement and depth to the repeats. And then some of them also have the subdivision that you can set. Do you want to have 8th note repeats, dotted 8th repeats, 16th note repeats? So it's a additional setting as it relates to the time feature for your delay pedal. Now delay is a powerful tool for creating some space and adding dimension to your worship guitar sound. However, it's really important to use delay thoughtfully to avoid cluttering the mix or competing with the vocals, because at the end of the day, you want to aim for a balanced and a tasteful application that enhances the overall worship experience rather than detract from it. All right, so let's go ahead and listen to a short delay time. And now let's listen to a longer delay time. So that basically sets the time that it's gonna, how the delay is gonna respond. If it's set to like a shorter time, it's gonna be very slap back sounding, and if it's set to a longer delay time, it's gonna there's gonna be more time in between your delays. Now next up, we're gonna look at feedback. And we're going to first start with the feedback set fairly low, like the way you might have it in the mix. And then we're going to set it super high, and then we're going to set it somewhere in the middle. So if we set that feedback super low, it's going to sound something like this. Now we're going to set it super high, where there's going to be way too many repeats. Listen to this if it's all the way to the right. That delay is just going to keep going. And that's obviously way too much, because by now you would have changed chords a couple of times already. So now let's rather put it somewhere in the middle, where instead of having infinity repeats, or instead of having just one repeat, we have like somewhere in the middle. It's going to sound like this. So in that instance, you can kind of dial that into taste. But if you have more repeats, then you're going to start getting a different sound. You must just make sure that it's something that adds to the sound rather than kind of gets in the way of other things. And now finally, we're going to look at the mix level. We're going to do the same. We're going to put the mix of the delay super low. Then we're going to put it super high. And then we're going to put it somewhere in the middle. So the mix or the level is how loud the delay is in comparison to your dry signal. So here, the mix is set super low. So you see, you don't really hear much of the delay. Now let's put it super high. In other words, the mix is going to be very loud. So all you're actually hearing there is the delayed signal. So you did not hear any of my dry signal. So both of those don't really work well. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, where you have a good mix between your dry signal as well as your delays as a result of your different settings. So again, once you know how to dial in the timing in terms of the tempo that you are playing with, to find the delay that works well with that, setting your feedback accordingly and your mix accordingly, then you can get a good sounding delay. And then finally, we have the reverb pedal. Now, a reverb pedal simulates the natural ambience of a physical space. It's going to add a sense of depth and atmosphere to your tone, and it can make your playing sound more immersive, and it can really help the guitar sit well in the overall mix. Now, a reverb pedal will add a series of decaying reflections to your signal, and that's how they go ahead and simulate the sound of a real acoustic space. And you can cover everything from a small room to a big hall and everything in between. That's why you have a setting called the decay or the reverb time, which will determine how long that reverb effect will sustain after the original signal. Longer decay times will create more of an expansive, lingering ambiance, whereas shorter decay times will make it sound like a smaller room. Now, pre-delay is one of my favorite settings on a delay pedal. You don't get that on a lot of delay pedals. Of course, you get it on digital devices, which will allow you to set a short delay between that drive signal and then the onset of the reverb effect, which will help you to maintain clarity and definition. The reason for that is if your reverb kicks in immediately, then it's like as soon as you play a note, it's going to add that reverb to the note. Whereas if you have pre-delay, for a moment, you're going to hear the clean sound, it's going to give you the clarity there, and then that reverb will go ahead and kick in. You also have your mix or level similar to the delay pedal, where you can adjust the balance between the dry signal and the reverb effect. And again, higher settings will result in more of an immersive, atmospheric sound, while lower settings will provide more of a subtle sense of space, like a small blues club or a small room or whatever the case may be. And then you get many reverb pedals. They also give you different reverb type or modes, like a hall reverb, a room reverb, a plate reverb, or a spring reverb. Each one of these will emulate a specific acoustic environment. And really, for worship guitarists, reverb is essential for creating that sense of depth and immersion in your worship guitar sound. However, just like delay, it's really essential to use reverb sparingly to avoid washing out your entire sound or even the whole mix, which will really mess up the clarity of your playing. So go ahead and experiment with different reverb types and settings to find the balance for your specific worship context. All right, so let's have a listen to the decay time of our reverb set quite low. I'm going to give the chord a strike and then I'm going to let it go, and then you can listen to what it sounds like when my decay time is set fairly low. So you can see that reverb tail doesn't last very long. Now, if I put it all the way up, then it's going to be way too long. But just for demonstration purposes, let's listen to this. And as you can hear, that's just going to keep continuing and continuing, kind of like you're playing in this massive cave where that echo just keeps reverberating in that space. So when it's somewhere in the middle, that's kind of what you want to shoot for, similar to what we saw with the delays. So then it's going to sound more like this. It's going to be all up to you in terms of how you want to set your decay times. Also factor in, obviously, the room that you are playing in. If you're already playing in a fairly big room or a hall, then you would probably use less of a decay time. Now let's listen to the reverb with and without any pre-delay. So this is what it sounds like with the pre-delay on. So you can see it takes a while for that reverb to actually kick in. And now if I put it all the way to the left, then the reverb kicks in immediately. And let's put it somewhere in the middle. So what that does, it just kind of makes your sound come through a little bit clearer in the beginning so that you can hear the attack and the transient quite nice, and then your delay is going to kick in. So you can experiment with where the pre-delay works for you so that it feels natural and sounds great. And then finally, we've got the mix or the level. In the same way, if the mix is all the way down, well, then you're going to hear more of the dry signal and very little of the actual reverb. Kind of sounds like there's hardly anything going on there. Now let's put it all the way to the right, where we're only going to hear the reverb. That's quite an interesting sound where you're only hearing the reverb. Again, not that useful. Let's go ahead and put it somewhere in the middle where we have a nice mix and a balance between the dry sound as well as the reverbed sound. Now, I'm just doing this for demonstration purposes. Of course, you wouldn't play that in a worship song like that, but you want your notes to ring out nicely. Just to add some space, some depth, and some dimension. Now, the last thing I'll say with reverb, if you put your delay on, then having a nice fat reverb after the delay is also going to affect the way the actual delay sounds. So let's listen to the delay without any reverb. So we've got some kind of a delayed setting over here, but no reverb added. Listen to what that sounds like. And let's add in the reverb now. So when you're feeding your delay into your reverb, that sounds nice, and it actually makes the delay sound a little bit less in your face. So that's the other important thing to notice, is how you use the effects in conjunction with each other. Now, in today's video, we didn't get time to look at modulation and pitch breaks, effects, etc. And we'll go ahead and look at those at another time. But for today, we just wanted to go ahead and focus on the essential effects. But if you'd like us to do a deeper dive on any effects that we covered today or even not covered, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Now, before we go, the final thing we need to discuss is the signal chain. The signal chain is the order in which you're going to go ahead and arrange all of these pedals. And again, there's no one correct order. There are some common and best practices and considerations. All right, now I'm going to listen to the volume pedal right in the beginning of the chain, before my drive pedals, before the delay pedals, before everything. And again, yeah, as we slowly but surely start engaging that volume pedal, the saturation is also going to increase because we are affecting the signal going into the drive pedals. So here we go. We're going to slowly but surely start engaging that volume. And then what I'm going to do now, just for effect, is we're going to play with the full volume, and then we're just going to bring that volume all the way down. Listen to what that does. Now all the way down. Then obviously as soon as it's all the way down, it basically gets rid of everything else after the volume pedal. So that's the volume pedal in the beginning. Let's have a listen to the volume pedal right at the end, behind the delays, or rather after the delays and the reverb. So let's listen by engaging that volume pedal as we go, and then we're going to also abruptly put it back into the heel position to see what the effect is like. So here we go, starting at the low volume, picking it out. And there we go, we put it down into the heel position very fast. So two things happened there, is it doesn't actually affect the quality of the drive like it would do when we have it in the beginning, where it would act the same as your volume control. Instead, my drive stays consistent, and it mostly just affects the actual volume, as the name suggests. But the problem with it being behind the reverbs, or rather after the reverbs and delays, when I put it into the heel down position, then if I had any delay trails of my sounds, they would also be muted. So that is something that you don't really like to do, because as you pull down your volume. If you had any delay trails, you still want to hear those. So let's go ahead now. We're going to go ahead and put it in the middle. So it's going to be after the drive pedals and before the wet pedals. And we're going to see what that sounds like. So there we went into the heel down position pretty fast, but it did not kill my delayed trails or the reverb tails. You were able to still hear those. And that is why that's my preference with the volume pedal after the drives and before the delays and the reverbs, because then it doesn't affect the amount of drive, rather it just affects the volume. And also it doesn't get rid of the delay and reverb trails if you go to the heel down position. When it comes to placing your boost pedal in your signal chain, if you put that before the drives, it's going to hit your drive pedals harder, resulting in more saturation and distortion, whereas putting it after the drives is going to more just increase the volume without adding more grit to your tone. Now, ultimately, the key is to experiment and to find what works best for you and your specific rig. Don't be afraid to try different pedal orders or different settings, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to see what it sounds like in different environments and how to find what works best for you. We've got some links in the description where I went and broken down my main guitar tone. We focused on drives, on reverbs and delays, doing more of a deep dive on specific effects, as well as talking about some of our favorite gear. So you can go ahead and check that in the description below. And if you're a Helix user, we've got a bunch of patches at our store, which you can also go ahead and pick up some of those for your own playing. And then ultimately, improving your technique is one of the best things that you can do for your tone. So if you want to get busy practicing and improving your technique, go ahead and check out this video. So there we go. I hope this video has helped demystify the world of modern worship guitar tone and just giving you some practical tips to guide you on your tone quest. And remember, the most important thing is to have fun in the whole process and to let your passion for the Lord and for worship shine through your playing. You want to keep experimenting, you want to keep growing as a guitar player, you want to keep using your gifts to lead others in praise. Now, if you found this video to be helpful, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more worship guitar content, and leave a comment below and let me know what some of your favorite pedals and signal chain tips are. Until next time, may your tone be ever evolving and your worship ever inspiring.